So it has been quite a volatile time to be a Kaisen fan. Just this past week alone, leading up to the release of the most recent chapter, I've seen a lot of hateful words. That this story is trash, garbage, the worst thing to exist, that everything that's going on currently is just really bad. And I, for one, was rather confused. I was like, what is going on in these spoilers that has people riled up? Surely there's not enough context within these very fragmented spoilers that aren't even translated, by the way, that has the community up in arms. Surely enough, not long after that, the full translated spoilers would release, which is the whole chapter translated to English before the official release, and it started to kind of die down a little bit. There was still stuff being talked about and how it's kind of losing touch with itself, it's going in a completely weird direction, and genuinely is losing interest rather fast. Once the official chapter released, all of that conversation kind of disappeared, mostly because you're kind of treading over the same water, but the attention span for the chapter was gone entirely. Now I sit here rather confused because any sort of hatred that I usually see for Kaisen is pretty directional. It has some sort of idea behind it and pointing towards this thing that that particular person didn't really like. This time was a little bit different. While there is things that people were pointing at, more so it seemed like people were just tired, that they were over what was going on in the recent stuff and just wanted to move past the Culling games in general. And this sentiment has been shared for quite a bit now, that the Culling games isn't really the best for Kaisen, that it feels like it's dragging out and really difficult to fall in love with every single week. Even with that type of explanation, whether you agree or not, I'm still kind of unsure. I read the recent chapter and I didn't necessarily see anything wrong with it, but I do see where people might be getting tired. That whole sentiment spreading towards the Culling games, however, I'm not too sure. See, I think this arc has done a lot for Kaisen. I feel it's allowed Akatami to spread his wings quite a bit when it comes to a lot of different characters, but I would be lying if I said that there is a lot that's being missed. For me, I would say mostly is the intimacy between characters, and that might be kind of weird to say because we get a bunch of fights that are very powerful, very development heavy, and invoke that type of intimacy, but I don't think it's the legitimate intimacy that a lot of people are looking for. See, these fights are great. They're a really good showcase of pushing people up the ranks to get them to where they need to be towards the ending of the Culling games, and that was kind of the whole purpose of the beginning. We were going through the stages and raising people up exponentially so they would sit on a more equal playing field, so much so that we haven't even seen a lot of our favorite characters' final arsenal of abilities. We're saving them. Yuta, Hakari, Yuji, Maki, Megami, etc. There's a bunch of characters that have shown great strengths, great evolution, yet never really the final stages, and that's okay. Where I would assume that a lot of people lost interest or lost touch with these characters and their events surrounding them was that it felt artificial, that it felt too purposeful, that we had to push these characters upwards in a pretty straightforward direction. So the consequence of that is you get kind of back-to-back fights that are very entertaining, which as they should be, but you never really have enough downtime between those fights to appreciate the next one. Basically, when things might start to feel a little artificial, readers will notice a lot more things. That artificial nature is prevalent within all stories because a writer is trying to get from point A to point B in a successful way that is progression. Normally, that author would want to hide it extremely well, and I think Akatami does a good job. However, because the Culling games is very heavy on fighting, very heavy on the power discrepancy, that's when a lot of readers start to notice more things after that artificial stage. Things might start to become repetitive or boring or samey in a sense, and unfortunately that may become the natural occurrence once people start to lose touch with the story. This brings up a pretty big umbrella question. Has Akatami done well with the Culling games? I believe this answer is going to be different for everyone. For me personally, I think it's great, but I can see where people might have fallen off the story, mostly because it's setting everyone up in a periodic fashion, one after the other, that reaches a level of believability. As soon as you get that idea in your head that all of these characters need to have some sort of showcase so we can see where they stand for the Culling games, it becomes a little bit predictable, and that's when that artificial nature starts to set in. As soon as you start thinking of things being just for the purpose of progression of the story's architecture, you start to lose sight of a lot of things. That's not the fault of yourself as a reader, but it will impact you the most. This feeling towards the Culling game has pretty much been there since day one, and it's only increasingly been fueled more and more. See, I can put it in a more simpler fashion. If I separate all of these fights within the first half of the Culling games and ask how you felt about them, you'd probably be really excited. These fights were great. great. They were amazing, beautiful, action-orientated, and showcases of strength and evolution. It was just a fun time. However, when you start to line them up together in a pretty short time frame, they feel a little bit repetitive. And when you start to reach this point of discussion, you'll notice that Shibuya as an arc starts to come up a lot more frequently. To simplify Shibuya in a way that is time appropriate, Shibuya balances every single fight with a different purpose. Shibuya has powerful moments and then it has emotional moments, and each fight kind of perfectly interacts with the prior and the one after it, as well as being its own kind of separate breathing point. So you can have Sukuna being crazily overpowered and showing us for the first time what he's capable of, and then right behind it have Yuji and Todo versus Mahito being more emotional. It's not a showcase of power, it's not a showcase of new abilities we've never seen before. This is personal for Yuji. Go back and look at every single Shibuya fight and you'll notice that there is a trend or pattern between swapping out these fights. One will be more power orientated, showing the dominance of abilities, and another will be more intimate and personal. The Culling Games does have this. The kicker is that it's not its focus this time. Instead, that power discrepancy was so massive between characters that we had to evolve them. If you didn't, you'd have characters that are severely lacking behind more than they already are. So every fight is currently a powerful one. Add on top of that, characters spanning from a lot of different time frames, you're showing off their power. You're showing off what they're capable of. There's been emotional moments, definitely. There's a lot of personal moments, but that's what I'm talking about. The intimacy between these fights has been severely overshadowed by the power of said individuals they're versing. Does that mean the Culling Games would benefit from having more emotional connections or fights, etc.? Yes and no. You'd have to rearrange the whole structure of the arc. You'd have to find a way to drastically boost your characters in a believable way that doesn't feel more artificial than currently what it might. You add more things in there, especially more intimate moments, you have a chance of completely overloading your readers, and there's already a lot going on now. So I think that might explain a lot of issues that people are having with the Culling Games in general. But what about now? Why were people so riled up for this most recent chapter? If I were to guess, I think mostly because you start to realize there is things here that you wish could have been seen. Things that could have been fleshed out more, for example. And it's always a disappointing time when you see a character or an action or a big reveal that you wish got more time to be shown. Now, whether it's the intention of the author to show that stuff or not, we don't know. So it's difficult to say that it's a waste of a character if they're not shown their backstory, when realistically, if we did get to see it, it might trample over a lot of other things that's already going on. It could overload us, it could steer our direction elsewhere and actually provide a negative experience to the overall progression of the story. Just because something isn't played upon doesn't mean it's wasted. There's still a ton of time for this story to play on things potentially in the future, but when you start to, I would say, believe your own headcanon when it comes to flashbacks or reveals or this or that, it starts to control what you want and what you think should happen within the actual story, when in reality the author was never thinking that to begin with, potentially. That doesn't mean authors are perfect and they can't miss out on things that would be cool to show, but because there's so many fans and them voicing the concerns of wasting characters or this moment or this thing that happened, it definitely overshadows the author's original intent, that they were never going to do that to begin with, and that's not a bad thing. The reason I talk about wasteful characters is because of Megumi and Sumiki. This recent stuff with Yorozu, I'm personally a little bit out of it, and it's not because I feel like Sumiki is wasted as a character and that she's genuinely serving a purpose for Megumi, which will most likely in the next chapter or two be provided by with a flashback of some sorts to show Megumi's kind of emotional connection to her. I'm just not a fan of Yorozu as a character, mostly because her loud, lovey personality feels a little bit jarring to what originally we've gotten for a lot of characters, but more so I don't believe that her power backs that overall aggression, at least when it comes to Sukuna. Maybe for other characters it would be a lot more fearful, but it's hard to take her serious because of this personality. So there's a little bit of a disconnect, I would say, for her character design, and it's only because she's going up against Sukuna, who is someone that you have to take serious because of the amount of power that he has, easily devouring anyone within his path, and he uses this as a time to be experimental, to test out his new abilities, so to speak. I think a lot of people would feel better about Yorozu if they were faced against another character, maybe Maki for example, or Yuta or Hikari, but we don't want to tread over the same water, so there's no other person to really put them against other than Sukuna. So instead of kind of this being their showcase, even though we get a flashback for them, you'll notice that Sukuna devours everything. He steals a lot of that spotlight, even within the flashback, even within the powers, and this more so just serves as a front for him to show us his abilities and what he's capable of, at least in the experimental department. So that might explain why people don't like Yorozu. The Sumiki and Megami stuff is difficult to navigate because a lot of people are very convinced already that Megami is done and dusted just based off this chapter. The thing is, even if he was done, even if he never comes back within this story, which personally I don't believe as of yet, we would still get a couple more chapters, if not one more chapter, to show his final goodbyes. This is not the last time you're ever going to see Megami, but people are acting like it is, very upset about that. All I can say is wait. Wait for what may happen with Sukuna and Megami, because I think you'd be very surprised. At this current time, I don't think Megami is done. The fact that Akutami is even going a step further and showing us Megami's reaction to what is going on in the outside world makes me believe that there is much more here, and the unattended effect of what Sukuna is trying to do, killing Sumiki, being kind of the catalyst of Megami's submersion, I hope he's wrong. Sukuna has been accurate and specific throughout this whole story, yet I think the one thing that he might have underestimated, that he might have completely got wrong, is that Megami would lay down and die after his sister vanished. I don't think that's the case, and this would be the best time to show Megami in a light that we have not seen before. Someone that is angry, someone that has lost everything and is willing to go through the motion of taking his revenge. Here is another thing to think about. Sumiki may genuinely be dead, and that may be used as fuel for Megami's rage, that overwhelming aggression. We just seen it prior with Yuji, that these characters need more. If they want to fight Sukuna, they can't adhere to the normal rules of the sorcery world. They need that aggression. Megami has always shown bits and pieces of it, but this might be his unfortunate tragic ticket to actually reach it. He has other people to fight for now. It's not just Sumiki, even the world. He has so many people that he is now fighting for. I don't think he's going to be submerged the way Sukuna wants him to be. What I'm trying to say is that we have plenty of time to explore this further, and with whatever direction Akutami wants to go, with Megami, with these characters, with the Culling games in general, I have all the more faith within. We're dealing with some very heavy issues, some very complex situations, and navigating them at a somewhat appropriate pace. Because there's so many of those things, sometimes they're going to fall a little bit flatter than the others. The upside, however, is just around the corner, something's going to spin up once again, and we are basically there. But I would like to hear all of your thoughts on Kaisen, with the more recent stuff, the hatred stuff, whatever it may be right now. Thank you for watching.